Hello, everyone. My name is Rodney Undercuffler, and I'm a specialist solutions architect here at AWS. So I focus on Microsoft workloads, optimizing them, migrating them into AWS, but in particular, I focus on identity and security. So just a little bit of background before we dive into the slides here. So I've been working with Active Directory for, 23 years now at this point. So that sounds very, very old when I say it out loud. But yeah, 23 years. And I've been doing Active Directory migrations, initial designs, all kinds of things with different customers. Before this, worked in a state system where I had 14 different forests all over the place, so a lot of Active Directory. So today, we're going to be talking about our directory services, and in particular, managed Active Directory that we have at AWS. I'm going to discuss several different use cases that we have that are really enabled by managed Active Directory when you're running in the cloud. So first and foremost, why are we even talking about Active Directory, right? It's a quarter century old at this point, right? It's very well understood. We know how to manage it. We know how to maintain it. But the reason we're talking about it is because I have conversations every day with our customers, and they have hard dependencies on Active Directory as you're moving into the AWS cloud. So we still have dependencies on directory services, like Kerberos, LDAP authentication. We're managing we're managing our devices with group policies. All of that hasn't gone away. It's still a requirement. We still need it as we're moving into the cloud. Very often, PKI is integrated, right? So we do support that with managed Active Directory. Rights management is still a requirement. And very often, Active Directory is our workforce identity management solution. No matter if it's being synchronized somewhere else, it's still the primary source of where our identities are being stored. And because of that, it's very often the primary identity store for things like Active Directory Federation services, or if you're in education, you're doing things like Shibboleth, or any number of our other partner solutions that are out there. So that's why we're talking about it today. So primarily, when we say AWS Directory Service, it actually consists of 3 different services. Today, we're going to be talking about, first, the AD connector. Just going to talk about that briefly. So the AD connector itself is a proxy or gateway service that we use to connect AWS native services to your self-managed or even a managed Active Directory. Right? So there's no credential caching that occurs. It's AWS service talking directly then with your Active Directory. There is something to keep in mind with AD connector. There's a one-to-one relationship. So we have one AD connector for one account. We have one AD connector for one domain. So if you have multiple forests, you have multiple domains, multiple accounts, you're going to need multiple AD connectors if you want all of them to be integrated. So today, we're going to focus primarily on managed Microsoft AD. Now, it's not an abstraction. It's not like open source implementation of Active Directory. It's real Active Directory built on Windows Server 2019. So you can do the things that you normally do with Active Directory. You can connect to it, manage your users, your groups, your computer accounts. You can connect to other domains via trust with managed Active Directory. And here's a key differentiator, I think, when you're going to be integrating your native services with your Active Directory. Managed Microsoft AD, you need one instance, and you can support multiple forests, multiple domains. You can share it with multiple accounts, both within your organization as well as across organization. So that's a key differentiator there. So if you have a complex environment, you have a multi-account strategy that you're using today, managed Active Directory is probably a good fit for your case to establish that connectivity with AWS native services. So why would we select Microsoft Managed AD over just using self-managed? And self-managed is a very good option. You want to extend in anyway, but why would you lay on top of that or migrate to a managed Active Directory? Well, as I mentioned, because it is actual Active Directory on 2019. It's a single tenant architecture, so we're not sharing these domain controllers between customers. You get a set of DCs in 2 different availability zones, and that is your Active Directory. It's not shared in any way. It is a single forest, single domain structure, so you got to keep that in mind when you're architecting. It does support both one-way and two-way trusts, and that's both external and forest trusts. So you can use that then, and we're going to dive into that in a future slide as far as the resource forest. Gives you a lot of flexibility as far as where your identities are and where your resources are that you're going to be connecting to. We do expose several different security settings and other Active Directory functionality to the console, as well as different APIs. So you can do things like configure your security protocols that are being used by LDAP. You can go into the console, make those changes. You can configure fine-grained password policies. So you can take care of those and really just apply the same settings that you need for your self-managed. Many of those you can apply into your managed Active Directory as well. As far as the tooling that you're going to use, you can use the console for a subset of it, but you can still connect to those domain controller ENIs and use your standard tooling. So AD users, computers, different snap-ins, PowerShell scripts to manage your users, your groups, your group policies, and so on. Now, one key feature that's enabled is the seamless domain join. So you don't need to maintain scripts to take care of that. Using seamless domain join, you can connect via your console, API action, the CLI, to automatically join those Windows and Linux EC2 instances to your domain. Okay. And as I mentioned, it does support multiple VPCs, multiple accounts. You just need to establish that network connectivity or share it with the accounts to get the seamless domain join and many of the other native features to work then. All right. And there we go. So multi-region replication. Now, by default, it's going to deploy to a single region, and we have two different editions. So standard edition is going to be for your smaller implementations or just to get started. So that's going to support approximately 30,000 objects. When you go to enterprise edition, that's supporting up to approximately 500,000 objects. But the big takeaway here with enterprise edition is the multi-region replication. So you now have the ability then to provision other sets of domain controllers into secondary, third regions, and they'll show up as additional sites within sites and services. And then finally, like the main reason why you would want to use a managed Active Directory as opposed to self-managed, you're offloading all of that operational tasks as far as deployments, patching, upgrades, the monitoring, remediation should services become impaired. All of that's being handled by the AWS side of the house for you. All right, so with that, let's dive into some of the use cases around managed Active Directory. And we'll start with the first and the primary one, workforce identities that you want to tie to your native AWS services. So in this example, we'll just start here. We have a self-managed Active Directory that's running on your on-premises environment. With a few clicks in the console, or the CDK, or CloudFormation, or Terraform, you just go ahead and deploy your managed Active Directory to a single VPC, and you select two subnets. You set up a trust, either one-way or a two-way trust. In this example, we'll just assume it's a two-way trust between the managed Active Directory and your self-managed. And with that, you now have the ability to leverage the identities that are in your on-prem Active Directory with your AWS-hosted Windows applications, whether that's .NET, SharePoint, any number of Windows applications that require Kerberos and LDAP authentication. We have the seamless domain join that's instantly enabled via that trust. Amazon RDS, which of course right now requires managed Microsoft Active Directory to enable that integrated Windows authentication with your RDS instances. And then of course Amazon FSx, which is our shared file server service. In addition to that, this is just a subset of the services, but these are some of the managed services that we have that would tie in with managed Microsoft AD and be able to leverage that trust so you can use your identities on premises or on EC2. If you were to go about migrating your users from your self-managed to managed Active Directory, you could do things like Azure AD Connect, synchronize those users up the same way you would with a self-managed. The only exception being you don't have the domain admin or enterprise admin, so you can't move like the password hashes up to Azure. But instead, you do something like pass-through authentication. So you could do pass-through authentication agents to tie your authentication back to the managed Active Directory. ADFS or any other number of SAML authentication could be tied to the managed AD at that point. and supporting other applications that you may already have in place, like Oracle Database, SAP, or .NET applications that you have today. One thing that I did want to call out was AWS IAM Identity Center has a native integration with Managed Active Directory and the AD connector for that matter. But with the Managed AD, you have one instance, and now you could synchronize as many users, groups that you wanted to from multiple domains, multiple forests, to AWS IAM Identity Center, and begin using those to access your AWS resources. The next use case that I wanted to discuss, and we'll see it, this is basically around the different organizational models around administrative autonomy that we see with our customers. So the first one is the organizational forest model. And you can see this is the two-way forest trust between Managed Active Directory and your self-managed Active Directory. So in this model, you can delegate out the administration of the Managed Active Directory to a team. It could be an individual, a group within your organization, but leverage the identity still in your corporate Active Directory. And because of the two-way forest trust, you can do that in either direction. So identities in the Managed AD could access resources if they're given permissions, and vice versa. The other one that we have here, and this is a very common model that we see with customers, is the resource forest model. Now the main difference looks very similar, but it's the one-way forest trust as opposed to the two-way forest trust. So in this way, you can isolate the service administration, so whether you have an identity team that's managing Active Directory that's completely separate from the cloud operations team, maybe a cloud identity team, they can delegate out that access to Managed Active Directory and still leverage all the identities on the self-managed Active Directory for your AWS resources. But you keep all of the resources themselves separated. So your computer accounts, your users and groups, your group policy and so forth would still be managed in the AWS side on the Managed Active Directory. And then finally, the other model that I wanted to talk about was the restricted access forest model, or just typically called standalone Managed Active Directory, right? So this one is a very common model that we see in highly restricted environments. So you may have confidential or very isolated workloads that need to be separated from the rest of your corporate domain. This is a very good fit for that. Of course, you do have to balance the additional maintenance in users, groups administration, with the separation and isolation requirements that you have. Another common use case for this is when we have, let's say you have developers that need to have separate environments. We can spin up individual environments if we need to, individual directories, if they need some higher level of access to the Active Directory than what you'd want to give them in production. Or you could even segment out dev, queue, prod. If the delegated OU model didn't work, you could use this instead. Excuse me, losing my voice here. All right, so those are the typical scenarios that we see as far as how Managed Active Directory gets deployed in your environment. The next use case is developer agility. And I did touch on that briefly, where if you have developers that need specific access to Active Directory and you didn't want to give that into your production environment, you can actually deploy this, whether it's a resource forest model or doing a standalone Managed Active Directory. You can deploy that for your developers and let them do what they need to do, give them that full access, and not have to worry about managing the underlying infrastructure, the replication, any of that, because it's being handled by the AWS side of the house. So a very common model that we see today is with especially service providers. So if you have a service provider that's deploying an application that requires Active Directory, rather than deploying that one large Active Directory for all of their customers, they can deploy Managed Active Directory as part of that individual workload, so a customer gets their own delegated Active Directory without any of the operational overhead involved. Okay. So, in summary, I went ahead and showed you several different use cases, so workforce identities, administrative autonomy, and we dove into developer agility just a little bit there. And I did want to leave you with some additional resources that we have, particularly the last two there. So the third one is a great blog written about trusts and how they work with Managed Active Directory, dispelling some of the common myths and the common questions that we get about Managed Active Directory and how it's tied into your self-managed AD. And then finally, The last one there is a whole security offering around how the security works with Managed AD, the compliance settings that you have, best practices around securing Managed AD in your environment, all in one place for you. So with that, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. When you get a moment, please take a second and fill out that session survey. We use all that information to continue to improve these and make sure we're on target and providing value. But I will be sticking around here, so if you have any specific questions, you want to talk Microsoft workloads or Active Directory, I'm happy to dive deeper on any of these topics. So thank you very much.